The phone call came while I was going through yesterday's mail. Among the utility bills and advertising brochures was a letter from the management company, which I hadn't had time to open. The number on the display was familiar to me. It was a call from the office of the company servicing our apartment complex. I set the envelopes aside on the kitchen table and picked up the phone, preparing for another formal conversation about a service charge increase or elevator replacement. Mrs. Coleman, this is Patricia from the management office. We have some unpleasant news for you. The woman's voice sounded sympathetic, but professionally detached. I leaned against the refrigerator and looked out the window as the October evening slowly descended behind me. The leaves on the maple tree in the yard had already turned almost completely yellow, and a few of them twirled in the air before falling to the pavement. At 72, I've already learned to take bad news standing up. It's easier to keep my composure that way. Too many times I'd gotten calls that had changed plans, dashed hopes, or just ruined my mood. I'm listening, I answered, mentally going over my options. Elevator breakdown, problems with the heating, an accident in the neighboring apartment, or something more serious. The apartment above you had a burst hot water pipe this morning. Water leaked through your ceiling. Our men have already surveyed the damage with the building manager. I'm afraid you'll have to move out temporarily while the repairs are made. I slowly shifted my gaze to the ceiling of the living room. There was a dark, irregularly shaped spot in the corner near the window that hadn't been there last night. The edges of the stain were blurry, like ink spreading over wet paper. How could I not have noticed it when I got home? However, I went to bed early last night, pulled the curtains right after dinner, and didn't even turn on the overhead light in the living room. How bad is the damage? I asked, realizing from Patricia's tone that I wasn't going to like the answer. Unfortunately, pretty bad. They're talking about replacing part of the ceiling, completely relaying the parquet in the living room and bedroom, and re-wallpapering all the rooms, plus professional drying of the rooms with special equipment. At least 8 weeks of work, and maybe all 10 if hidden damage is discovered. 8 weeks. 2 months, if not more. I sank slowly into the chair by the kitchen table, looking at my cozy kitchen with the yellow floral curtains I'd sewn myself 5 years ago, when I'd first moved here after Frank died. It seemed like the beginning of a new life, a life without the constant worry about my sick husband, without the endless trips to the doctors, without night duty at his bedside. This apartment became my fortress, my refuge, a place where I learned to live alone and be happy. Would the insurance cover the cost of temporary housing? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Our insurance company was notorious for its ingenuity in finding reasons to deny payments. When my air conditioner broke 3 years ago, it took them 6 months to prove that it was due to my improper maintenance. Unfortunately, it wasn't. The accident happened in your upstairs neighbor's apartment, and their insurance only covers direct damage to their own property. Your insurance doesn't cover this either. It's in the fine print of the contract. But we can provide you with a list of inexpensive hotels and motels nearby. Inexpensive hotels and motels. I mentally calculated my modest budget. Frank's pension plus my own, the small savings I'd been saving for a rainy day. It would be enough for a month in a decent place, maybe a month and a half if I went with the cheapest options, but definitely not 2 months, especially if the renovation dragged on for up to 10 weeks. When exactly do I have to vacate the apartment? I asked, hoping to gain at least a few days to think. The workers start dismantling the day after tomorrow morning. All the furniture and personal belongings have to be taken out. Tomorrow, an appraiser will come to you to make a detailed inventory of the damage for the neighbor's insurance company. In the afternoon, you can pick up your documents and keys to temporary storage. We rented a box in the warehouse for you. After the conversation ended, I sat in silence for a while, absent-mindedly thumbing through the envelopes on the desk. An electric bill, an advertisement for a new pizzeria, an invitation to a department store sale, an ordinary life that had suddenly been disrupted. I got up and walked around the apartment, assessing the magnitude of the impending move. The couch and chairs from the living room, the bed and dresser from the bedroom, the kitchen furniture, the bookshelves. 37 years of living with Frank, plus 5 years of being on her own, all of it needed to be packed up and sent to storage. There was still groceries in the refrigerator from 3 days ago: milk, bread, salad vegetables, frozen cutlets. All of that would have to be thrown out too, or given away to neighbors. The thought of wasting money was especially painful now that every dollar mattered. I could have asked Jason for help after all. He was my only son, the only family I had left after Frank died. But we hadn't talked much since he'd married Michelle 7 years ago. She wasn't particularly fond of her mother-in-law, thought I was old-fashioned and intrusive. Jason preferred to avoid potential conflicts and limited our communication to occasional phone calls and the obligatory holiday visits. But now I had no choice. I had no friends to stay with for 2 months. Most of my peers either lived in nursing homes or needed help themselves. My sister had died 4 years ago of cancer, and my parents had long since been laid to rest in the cemetery. Jason was my only hope. I picked up the phone and dialed the familiar number I'd learned by heart when Jason got his first cell phone. It took a long time, and I was about to hang up when I finally heard a familiar voice. Mom, hi. I'm at work, and we have an important meeting that starts in 10 minutes. What's up? His voice was hurried, slightly irritated, like it always was when I called him during work hours. I pictured him sitting in his office, in a strict suit, with folders of documents on his desk. A successful insurance company manager who didn't like personal matters interfering with his work schedule. Jason, I need to talk to you. There's been a serious accident at my apartment, and I need to find another place to live for a while. There was a pause. I could hear someone in the background talking about quarterly reports and looming deadlines, the voices of coworkers, the clicking of computer keys, an office bustle in which I was clearly intruding with my own problems. What do you mean, an accident? You're not hurt? Maybe you need an ambulance? No, I'm fine. The neighbors upstairs flooded my apartment, burst a pipe. The ceiling and floors are badly damaged. It's going to take about 8 weeks, maybe more. And you want to? He didn't finish, but I realized he'd already guessed what I was asking. I was wondering if I could stay with you during that time. I won't disturb anyone, I promise. I can sleep on the sofa bed in the living room or in the study. I'll help around the house. Keep an eye on Sierra. Another pause, longer and more tense. I imagined what Jason looked like now: the furrowed brow, the tight lips, the gaze staring out the window of the 23rd floor office. He'd always done that ever since he was a kid, when he was in a tight spot. First, he kept silent, thinking through all the possible consequences, and then he made the decision that seemed safest to him. Mom, this is really hard. We don't have the easiest situation at home right now. Michelle is stressed out at work. Her bonuses have been cut, and she's threatening to be laid off. Sierra's studying for her final exams, and she needs quiet time to study. The house is already full of tension, and everyone's nervous. Jason, I'm your mother. I have nowhere else to turn. I'm not asking for much, just a roof over my head for a while. I heard him sigh heavily. He must have looked at his watch, wondering how much time he had left before the meeting. There was another murmur of voices calling his name, hurrying him. Okay, okay. His voice became even more strained. Let me talk to Michelle tonight. We'll discuss our options. Maybe we can find some sort of temporary solution. I'll call you back tomorrow morning, okay? Jason, I have to move out of my apartment the day after tomorrow. I don't have a lot of time. I understand, Mom. I'll be sure to call you back early tomorrow morning. Right now, I really have to go to a meeting. Okay, son. I look forward to your call. He hung up, and I sat there with the phone in my hands, staring at the dark spot on the ceiling. It had definitely gotten bigger since this morning. The edges were sharper, and there was an area in the center where the plaster was starting to peel away. Or was it just a play of imagination brought on by anxiety? In the evening, I started packing the essentials into my suitcase. If Jason was going to take me in, I needed to be ready to move. I opened the old leather suitcase I'd once taken on my honeymoon with Frank and began to put my everyday clothes in it. A warm sweater I'd knitted myself last winter, comfortable pants for home, a few blouses for going out, blood pressure and heart medication, vitamins the doctor prescribed. 3 favorite books: an Agatha Christie detective, a collection of O. Henry stories, and a novel about the war that she reread every few years. And of course, a silver-framed picture of Frank, the one of him laughing as he stood beside our first car. While I was packing, it got dark outside the window. I turned on the desk lamp and continued packing, trying not to think about what would happen if Jason said no. Hotels were too expensive, and the cheap motels on the outskirts of town didn't seem safe for a lonely, elderly woman. I hardly slept at night. Every sound in the house seemed to me like dripping water, every shadow on the wall like a growing patch of damp. The neighbors upstairs must have been awake too. I could hear footsteps, muffled voices, and the sound of furniture being moved. They were probably dealing with the aftermath of the accident, solving their own problems. By morning, I was exhausted and agitated, my head aching from lack of sleep. Jason called at 9 in the morning, just as he'd promised. I'd been sitting in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee for 2 hours, waiting for his call and listening to the sounds from the apartment upstairs. Mom, good morning. Michelle and I have been discussing your situation all evening. His voice was as strained as it had been the night before, but I could hear the determination in it. You can stay with us, but it's really strictly temporary, just during the renovations, and we'll definitely need to work out some details and rules for living together when you get here. Thank you, son. I really appreciate you and Michelle's help. I promise I'll abide by any rules. Come over this afternoon. Michelle will be home after 3. We'll talk it over. And Mom, try to bring only the essentials, okay? We don't have a lot of space. I felt a mixed feeling of relief and anxiety. Relief because a roof over my head had been found. Anxiety because something in Jason's tone was unsettling. He sounded as if he were inviting a distant relative to whom he was doing a favor out of obligation, rather than his own mother. Jason's house was in one of those upscale neighborhoods in Indianapolis, where the streets were all named after English counties, and the houses stood like expensive toys, neat and impersonal at the same time. The cab driver looked around curiously at the manicured lawns and shiny cars in the driveways as I paid for the ride. He probably rarely brought passengers to this neighborhood. People here preferred their own cars to public transportation. I stood on the doorstep with a heavy suitcase in my hand, looking at the house that had once seemed to me a symbol of Jason's success. The 2-story red brick structure with white columns at the entrance, the perfectly trimmed bushes along the driveway, the automatic sprinkler system that turned on just in time. 7 years ago, when my son first showed me this purchase, I was proud of his accomplishments. Now, looking at the immaculate facade, I felt only tired and embarrassed. Before I pressed the bell, I fixed my hair and smoothed the creases in my coat. I wanted to look dignified, not like a petitioner, but like a guest. Although, to be honest, the difference between these notions now seemed very tentative. Michelle opened the door. She hadn't changed much in the 7 years she'd been with Jason. The same shoulder-length bob, the same neat makeup, the same expensive tracksuits she wore at home. Only her gaze was harder and her smile more strained. "Hello, Barbara," she said, making no attempt to hug me or take my suitcase. "Jason said you were coming. Come on in." I crossed the threshold and found myself in a spacious hallway with a marble floor and mirrored walls. Michelle double locked the door and turned to me with the expression of someone who'd been forced to perform an unpleasant duty. "Leave your shoes here." She pointed to a special shelf near the entrance. "We have light-colored carpets, so you have to be careful." I obediently took off my shoes and put them in the designated place. My old but comfortable leather shoes looked alien among the fancy sneakers and slim loafers neatly arranged by size. "Jason's not back from work yet?" I asked, looking around. The house was impeccably clean, every single thing in its place. There were fresh issues of expensive magazines on the coffee table in the living room, and identical silver-framed photos on the mantel. "Delayed, urgent project," Michelle answered without looking at me. She walked ahead, and I dragged my suitcase behind me, careful not to damage the parquet with the wheels. We went through the living room into the dining room, and from there into the kitchen. All the rooms were in the same style beige and cream colors, expensive furniture, no unnecessary details. Beautiful but cold, like the setting for an interior design magazine. "Do you want coffee?" Michelle offered, but her tone was more formal than hospitable. "Thank you, I'd love some." She took 2 cups out of the cupboard, fine china with gold piping, and poured coffee from an expensive coffee machine. I sat down at the kitchen table with my hands on the polished surface and tried to find the words to start a conversation. "Michelle, I'm very grateful that you agreed to host me. I realize it's an inconvenience." "Yes," she placed a cup in front of me and sat down across from me. "To be honest, we're not happy about it at all. We have enough problems as it is." Her frankness caught me off guard. I'd expected polite excuses, maybe a strained courtesy, but not that kind of directness. "I understand. I'll try to stay out of your way as much as possible. Maybe I can even do something to help out around the house." Michelle shook her head skeptically. "I don't think so. We have a system here. The cleaning service comes twice a week. We order groceries online, and I cook my own recipes." I took a sip of coffee that was too strong and bitter. In my own house, I drank coffee with milk, but here I guess they preferred espresso. "Where would I sleep?" I asked cautiously. "Jason's office. There's a fold-out couch. It's not very comfortable, but it's the only option. We don't have a guest room anymore. We turned it into a playroom for Sierra, a playroom for a 17-year-old girl. I didn't say anything about what exactly a girl that age played in there." "Is Sierra home?" "She's still in school. She'll be back by 6. Michelle looked at the clock on the wall. "Listen, Barbara, let's talk about the rules right away so there won't be any misunderstandings later." I nodded, prepared to listen to a list of restrictions. "First of all, we eat breakfast early, at 7 in the morning. Jason leaves for work at 8. Sierra for school at 8:30. If you want to have breakfast with us, you have to get up early. If not, you can make your own, but not until after we're all gone." I made a mental note to get up at 7:30 so I could wash up and get cleaned up. "Secondly, we have dinner at 7 o'clock at night. I cook, I count on a certain number of portions. If you want to have dinner with your family, let me know in advance. If you don't, again, you cook for yourself." "I see. What about lunch?" "Lunch is your problem. Jason eats lunch at the office, Sierra at the school cafeteria. I snack on yogurt or salad. There's a compartment in the fridge for your groceries. I'll show you which one." Michelle stood up and opened the huge 2-door refrigerator. Inside, everything was arranged on shelves with mathematical precision. Dairy products on the left, meat and fish on the right, vegetables in special containers. "This shelf right here," she pointed to the lowest one, "and part of the freezer. Just make sure your food doesn't leak or smell." "I will. Where can I do my laundry?" "There's a washing machine in the basement, but we have a set schedule. I do laundry on Mondays and Thursdays, Sierra on Saturdays. You can use Tuesdays and Fridays, but only with your own powder. I tried to memorize all the details of this complicated routine. Monday and Thursday were Michelle's. Saturday was Sierra's. Tuesday and Friday were mine. That left Wednesday and Sunday, but I didn't ask about that. One more important thing, Michelle continued. Sierra is studying for her final exams. She needs absolute silence to study. No TV loudly, no phone calls after 9 p.m., no music. Of course, I understand the importance of studying. One last thing. Michelle sat back down at her desk and looked me straight in the eye. This is a temporary placement. As soon as your renovations are finished, you're moving back in. We can't afford to keep an extra person for long. The word keep hurt my ears, like I wasn't Jason's mother, but a freeloader who'd been taken in out of pity. I'm not going to be a burden, I said as calmly as I could. And, of course, I'd be willing to contribute to the groceries and utilities. Michelle perked up for a second. Yes, that would be fair. Groceries are getting more expensive every week now, and utility bills are cosmic in winter. At that moment, there was the sound of a door opening in the hallway, followed by footsteps. Jason came home from work. I heard him taking off his shoes, hanging his coat in the closet. A minute later, he appeared in the kitchen, a tall, trim man of 38, wearing a suit and tie. My son, who once ran home from school as a boy and told me everything that had happened during the day. Hi, Mom. He kissed me quickly on the cheek. He smelled of expensive cologne and faintly of cigarettes. How was your trip? It was fine. Michelle had already told me about the house rules. Jason shot a quick glance at his wife, as if checking to make sure she'd said everything right. Good. I hope you'll be comfortable here. His voice sounded polite but detached. He spoke to me the way he probably spoke to customers at the insurance company. Would you show me the office where I'll sleep? Sure. We went up the oak-railed staircase to the second floor. Upstairs was a long hallway with several doors. Jason opened one of them and turned on the light. The office was small and cramped. A desk by the window, bookshelves along the wall, a leather armchair, and a narrow couch that was supposed to be a bed. On the desk were pictures. Michelle's, Sierra's, Jason's performance awards. Not a single picture of my dad or me. The linens are in the closet, Jason said, opening the closet doors. Towels are in there too. You'll share the bathroom with Sierra. It's down the hall. I set my suitcase down by the couch and looked around. The room was clean and neat, but completely impersonal. No personal belongings except for the work papers on the desk. Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate your help. Mom, he shifted awkwardly from foot to foot. I want you to understand, this is really just temporary. We're going through a rough patch right now. There are layoffs at work, and Michelle is worried about losing her position. Sierra is in her last year of high school, nervous about going to college. I understand, son. I'll try not to add to it. And, he paused for a moment, trying to find the words. Maybe you should think about a nursing home. I know it doesn't sound like much, but there's medical care, organized meals, socialization with peers, and financially, it might be better than a long-term lease on an apartment. Nursing home. I looked at my son and couldn't believe he had said those words. There was no anger or indifference in his eyes, just tiredness and a desire to solve the problem as simply as possible. I'll think about it, I said, even though the thought of a nursing home made me panic. Good. Well, make yourself comfortable. Dinner is at 7, like Michelle said. He went out, closing the door behind him, and I was left alone in someone else's office with a suitcase and the bitter realization that my life had changed dramatically in one day. I sat on the edge of the couch and looked out the window. Behind the glass, I could see the roofs of neighboring houses, antennas, wires, a foreign view, a foreign sky. I took Frank's picture out of my suitcase and put it on the bookshelf next to the Shakespeare volume. At least one native face was now looking back at me in this house. By 7 o'clock that evening, I had managed to unpack my suitcase and arrange my few belongings on the shelves in my closet. Frank's picture now stood on the bookshelf like an old friend watching. I changed into a clean blouse and went downstairs, trying not to be late for dinner or disturb the order of the house. The dining room was lit by the soft light of the chandelier over the massive oak table. Michelle was already arranging plates, and Sierra sat in the corner at her phone, not even looking up when I walked in. In 7 years, her granddaughter had grown from a mischievous 10-year-old girl to a tall 17-year-old with long dark hair and an indifferent expression. She wore fashionable ripped jeans and a top that revealed her belly. Large earrings glittered in her ears and many bracelets on her wrists. "Hi, Sierra," I said as I approached the table. "Hi," she said, keeping her eyes on the screen. Jason showed up a few minutes later, already changed into his home clothes jeans and a sweater. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes. It must have been a long day at work. "How are things going at the office?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "The usual. Lots of work, not much time," he replied, sitting down at the table. Michelle brought a large pot of something that smelled of Italian herbs and garlic from the kitchen. Lasagna, judging by the smell. She set the pot in the center of the table, next to a basket of bread and a salad bowl. "Sierra, put the phone away," Michelle said. "You don't sit at the table with gadgets." "5 more minutes," the girl muttered. "Now," her mother repeated more sternly. Sierra rolled her eyes but obeyed, slipping her phone into her jeans pocket. Now she was looking anywhere but at me. Michelle placed the lasagna on plates. The portions were neat, the same size, and I noticed that mine was a little smaller than the others. Not critical, but noticeable. "It smells delicious," I said, trying to keep the atmosphere light. "Do you have a special recipe?" "Italian. I found it on the internet on the website of a chef from Rome," Michelle replied, but her tone was cool. We ate in relative silence. Jason occasionally commented on the taste of the food. Sierra chewed while staring at the ceiling. Michelle made comments to her daughter about her posture at the table. I tried to eat carefully and quietly, feeling unwelcome at the family feast. "Sierra, how are things going with studying for the exams?" I asked, hoping to connect with my granddaughter. "Fine," she mumbled. "What subjects are you taking?" "Math, English, history, chemistry. It's very difficult. In my time, there were fewer final exams." Sierra shrugged, signaling that she wasn't interested in my time. "Sierra plans to go to a good college," Michelle intervened. "We've already applied to several universities. There's a lot of competition, and you need high grades." "That's great. In what field do you want to specialize?" I turned to my granddaughter. "I haven't decided yet. Maybe economics or marketing." Jason put down his fork and looked at his wife. There was a silent signal between them that I couldn't decipher. "Mom," Jason said, "Michelle and I were talking about you staying with us. We wanted to talk about the practicalities." I felt myself tense up. I could tell by the tone that it wasn't going to be about whether I was comfortable sleeping on the couch. "I'm listening," I answered, putting my fork aside. "You see," Michelle began, "your presence here creates certain additional expenses. Utility bills are already high in winter, and now you'll be using more water, electricity, heating. I've already said that I'm ready to participate in the payment," I reminded. "Yes, but it's not just that," Michelle continued. "Groceries are insanely expensive now. We buy quality stuff, organic meat, farm vegetables, good dairy products. It's not cheap." Jason nodded in support of his wife. "And detergent, toilet paper, soap, shampoo. It all goes out faster when there are more people in the house." I listened to the list and realized where the conversation was going. They wanted me to pay for my stay here, not a token contribution, but as a guest in a boarding house. "How much do you think is fair?" I asked. Michelle and Jason exchanged glances again. Apparently, they had already discussed this figure among themselves. We've worked out the approximate costs, Jason said. Utilities, groceries, cleaning supplies, plus wear and tear on furniture and equipment. That works out to about $125 a week. $125 a week. In 8 weeks, that would be $1,000, a third of my savings. That's quite a lot, I said, trying to keep my tone calm. Try to find a decent hotel for less, Michelle said. And with meals, good hotels now ask for $200 a night minimum. But we're a family, I objected. Jason, I'm your mother. Mom? He avoided a direct look. I know it sounds harsh, but we're in a really difficult financial situation. Michelle could lose her job. We need to save money for college for Sierra. We can't afford charity. Charity. Helping his own mother, he called charity. Besides, Michelle added, there's also the issue of inconvenience. We have to change our habits, adjust to the presence of one more person. It's harder for Sierra to study for exams when there are more people in the house. I looked at my granddaughter, who was intently studying the drawing on her plate. She was clearly uncomfortable with this conversation. One more thing, Michelle continued. We are used to a certain level of privacy. When there's a stranger in the house, it creates tension. A stranger. Not my mother-in-law, not Sierra's grandmother, but a stranger. I understand, I said. I need time to think about your terms. Of course, Jason nodded. But I'd like to get this resolved quickly so that everyone has an understanding of the situation. The rest of the dinner was a long silence. Michelle cleared the table, clanking the dishes louder than usual. Sierra disappeared upstairs, citing homework. Jason retired to the living room to watch the news. I offered to help with the dishes, but Michelle declined. We have a dishwasher, she said. I'll load it myself. I went up to the office and sat on the couch, trying to process what had happened. $125 a week for the right to sleep on an uncomfortable couch in my son's house, for the right to eat lasagna in smaller portions than everyone else, for the right to listen to being called an outsider and a source of inconvenience. Through the office window, I could see the lit street, the neighbors' houses, the parked cars. Somewhere out there lived people who might have been happy to host elderly parents, who didn't have to calculate how much it cost for an extra bar of soap and an extra liter of hot water. I held up a picture of Frank. He was smiling in the picture, standing beside our first car, an old sedan we'd bought on credit the year after we were married. We were young and happy then, believing that we had a long life together ahead of us, that our future son would be our support and joy. What would you advise, Frank? I quietly asked the photograph. Of course, there was no answer, but I knew what my husband would say. He had always been a practical man, not prone to sentimentality. Pay if you can afford it, he would have said. But remember that debts are not forgotten. Sooner or later, you have to pay for everything. Outside the window, the rain began to drizzle. Droplets dripped down the glass, blurring the lights of the street lamps. Somewhere downstairs, a car door slammed. Footsteps walked down the driveway. Neighbors were returning home to their cozy homes, to their loving families. And I sat in someone else's office and calculated whether I had enough money for 2 months of such a family life. And I realized that even if I had enough, the question is not about money. The issue was that I had become an unwanted burden for the only person on earth who should have loved me simply because I was his mother. In the morning, I woke up to the sound of the alarm clock at 7:30. I slept badly. The couch was hard and uncomfortable, and the pillow was too high. My back was aching, my neck stiff. At 72, the body doesn't forgive uncomfortable postures and poor quality sleep. Through the thin walls of the study came the sounds of the house waking up, the sound of water in the pipes, creaking floorboards, muffled voices. I got up, folded the bedclothes neatly, and began to dress, trying not to make any noise. I wanted to wash and clean up before the family took over the bathroom. There was a faint nightlight burning in the hallway. I tiptoed to the bathroom and quietly locked myself in. The room was spacious, with a large mirror and expensive fixtures. There were numerous jars and bottles on shelves, creams, lotions, expensive cosmetics. It all belonged to Michelle and Sierra. I took out my modest cosmetics, toothbrush, toothpaste, face cream, and put them in the corner so they wouldn't get in the way. The reflection in the mirror showed a tired older woman with wrinkles around her eyes and gray hair that had disheveled overnight. I tried to tidy up my hair, but the result was a mess. At home, I had a comfortable dressing table with good lighting, but here I had to make do with what I had. When I returned to the office, there were voices outside the wall. Michelle was saying something to Sierra about school uniforms. Jason was turning on the shower. The family was starting their day on a practiced schedule, and I was an extra element in that system. I went down to the kitchen at exactly 7 in the morning, as agreed. Michelle was already preparing breakfast: scrambled eggs and bacon, toast, freshly squeezed orange juice. There were 4 plates on the table, but one was clearly smaller than the others. A child's plate with a pattern on it, apparently once used by little Sierra. "Good morning," I said. "Morning," Michelle mumbled, not turning from the stove. Jason showed up a few minutes later, dressed in a suit and tie. He looked organized and businesslike, but there were still shadows of fatigue under his eyes. "Hey, Mom, how'd you sleep?" "Fine, thanks." Sierra came down last, wearing her school uniform, a dark blue skirt, a white blouse, and a jacket with the school logo on it. Hair in a neat ponytail, light makeup on her face. She looked very mature and serious. "Hi, Grandma," she said, and for the first time, she sounded warm. "Good morning, dear. Ready for another day of school?" "Uh-huh. Chemistry test today." "Good luck." We sat down at the table. Breakfast was quick and businesslike. Jason was watching the news on his phone, sipping coffee. Sierra was hurriedly munching on toast, glancing at her watch. Michelle ate in silence, occasionally making remarks to her daughter about remembering to bring her textbooks and gym uniform. "Mom," Jason turned to me. "I need to talk to you after they leave. Do we have a few minutes?" "Sure." At 8:30, Sierra ran off to school, kissing her mother goodbye and waving goodbye to me. Michelle got ready for work and disappeared too, leaving the two of us in the kitchen. Jason finished his coffee and looked at me with a serious look. "Mom, I want to talk to you about what we talked about yesterday, about your cost sharing." "I'm listening." Michelle and I did the math again. $125 a week is the minimum. To be honest, it's more than that, but we don't want to burden you. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "In 8 weeks, that works out to $1,000, but the repair can take up to 10 weeks, or even longer. That's why we offer a fixed sum of $7,500 for the whole period of stay, no matter how long it lasts. $7,500, practically my entire savings. The money I'd been saving for illness, for emergencies, expenses, a proper funeral if anything happened." "Jason, that's a lot of money for me." "Mom, I understand, but try to look at the situation from our side. We provide you with housing, food, utilities, plus the inconvenience to the whole family. 7.5 grand is a fair price." "What if I can't pay that amount?" Jason paused, fiddling with his empty coffee cup. "Then we'll have to find another solution. I can help you find a decent nursing home. There's medical care, balanced meals, recreational programs. You want to live there, pay $7,500, he suddenly said sharply, and his voice sounded almost aggressive. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. This cold, calculating man in the expensive suit was nothing like the boy I'd raised, the boy I'd read bedtime stories to, the boy I'd worried about during illnesses and school failures. Jason, I said quietly, do you remember when you called me in tears 3 years ago because you couldn't keep up with your credit card payments? My son's face changed instantly. His blush faded, his eyes widened in surprise. What did you say? I know about your debts. I know about the late payments on the car loan, too. Rick Palmer told me at his wife's funeral last year. He worked in your finance department until he quit. Jason went pale. Rick had indeed worked for his company and had access to information about employees' credit histories. When he'd quit, he'd apparently told people he knew about his coworkers' financial problems. Not out of malice, just gossip, a character trait I remembered from when I'd been in high school with Jason. Mom, this is different. It is? I thought it was a very similar situation. You asked me for help, and I gave you money. No interest, no strings attached, no strings attached, because you're my son. But that was an exception, a temporary hardship. Like my situation now, a temporary hardship. Jason got up from the table and paced the kitchen. He was clearly nervous, trying to find words to justify himself. Mom, it was a different situation then. I was having temporary problems at work, delayed bonuses, and now you're asking us to support you for 2 months without compensation. I'm not asking for support. I'm asking for shelter. That's not how money works in this family. We're not the Rockefellers, he flared up. We have our own expenses, our own plans. Sierra needs money for college. We need to save for the future. Do you have money for a car loan? That new car in the garage? It's a necessity. I need a reliable car for work. I looked out the window at the driveway, where a shiny black late model SUV was parked. A necessity then. $70,000 of necessity. Jason, I don't mind contributing to the cost, but 7,500 is robbing your own mother. Don't be dramatic. He returned to the table, but didn't sit down. It's a fair market price for services. Services? I couldn't believe my ears. You call helping your own mother a favor? Mom, you're living in the past. This is the 21st century. Everything is fair. Even in the family. Fairness. It's an interesting concept of fairness when a son demands money from his mother to sleep at his house. And how much did you pay me for raising you for 18 years? I asked. Feeding you, clothing you, treating you, taking you to school, helping you with your lessons. How much was that worth at your fair market value? Jason pressed his lips together. It was your choice. You chose to have a child, so you were willing to bear the cost. Did you decide to have a mother when you were born? Mom, don't twist things around. That's a completely different thing. I got up from the table and went to the window. It was overcast outside, gray clouds hanging low over the roofs of the houses. Somewhere out there were normal families, where elderly parents were welcomed, not charged for every piece of bread. So your final decision is 7,500 or a nursing home? Mom, I don't want you to think badly of us. We're just trying to be honest. It's better to negotiate terms than to fight over money. I see. I turned to him. I need some time to think about it. Of course you do. But don't take too long, please. Michelle is worried about the uncertainty. Michelle's worried. And what I'm worried about? Being without a home and facing my own son's greed apparently doesn't matter. I'll give you an answer tonight. Okay. Jason picked up his briefcase and headed for the exit. I have to go to work. I'll see you tonight. He left, and I was alone in the kitchen with dirty plates and a bitter taste in my mouth. $7,500 for the right to be called a mother, the right to sleep on an uncomfortable couch and eat off a child's plate, for the right to listen to being called a source of discomfort. I began clearing the table, machine stacking plates into the dishwasher. The movements were familiar, automatic. The years of housekeeping had accustomed my hands to working independently of my thoughts. And thoughts weren't fun. Rick Palmer had indeed told me about Jason's financial problems, but not out of spite, just out of senility. We were standing in the cemetery after his wife's funeral, and he was complaining about how hard it was to grow old alone, how expensive it had become to live, how little help his grown-up children were. And in between, he mentioned what he'd seen in the company files. Many employees had credit problems, including Jason. I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought it was just a temporary hardship that many families face. I didn't realize that my successful son, living in an expensive house and driving a new car, was actually barely making ends meet. But now that he was demanding that kind of money from me, a lot of things made sense. Expensive house on credit, new car on credit, expensive clothes, vacations, restaurants, all built on debt. And here was an opportunity to make things right at my mother's expense. I finished cleaning the kitchen and went up to the study. I had to think it over, weigh the options, make a decision, because it was unbearable to live in the atmosphere of bargaining for every day under the roof of my own son. I spent the whole day thinking, sitting in Jason's office, staring out the window at the faceless suburbs. Time stretched slowly, each minute filled with painful memories and bitter conclusions. I thought about the little boy I'd once raised and the cold man he'd become. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, something had gone wrong, and I had no way of knowing what it was. Around noon, Michelle came home from work. I heard the car door slam, then the front door, footsteps on the first floor. She was doing something in the kitchen, rattling dishes, turning various appliances on and off. It smelled like something delicious, like she was cooking dinner. I wanted to go downstairs, to offer help, to try to mend relations, but I remembered yesterday's words that they had a system. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rang. Michelle was talking to someone long and emotional, raising her voice at times. I involuntarily listened, trying to understand what was being said. The fragments of phrases that reached the second floor spoke about work, about some problems, about unfair attitude of the bosses. Apparently, the situation in her office was really tense. After the call, there was silence in the house. I picked up a book, the Agatha Christie detective book I'd brought with me, but I couldn't concentrate on reading. The lines blurred in front of my eyes. My mind kept returning to the conversation I'd had with my son that morning. $7,500. That amount sounded like a haunting melody in my head. I took my bank book out of my purse and counted my savings once again. $8,400. Money that had been saved over the years. Leftovers from my pension. A little insurance after Frank died. Saving for everything. Every dollar had been set aside with difficulty. Every purchase thought over several times. If I paid Jason the required amount, I'd have less than $1,000 left. That would be enough for a few months of frugal living at most. And then what? If I get sick, if I need treatment, if there are unforeseen expenses? At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Sierra returned. I heard her voice downstairs. She was telling her mother about a chemistry test, complaining about the difficulty of the assignments. Michelle was answering something, and it was clear from her tone that the conversation was friendly. There was a normal, warm relationship between mother and daughter, the kind of relationship that Jason and I had once had. I tried to remember exactly when things had changed. Maybe when he went to college and started living on his own, or when he got a job and felt financially independent, or maybe when he met Michelle and married her. Michelle never hid her relationship with me. From the beginning, she made it clear that she thought I was old-fashioned, clingy, out of place in their new life. Jason was still trying to smooth things over, inviting me to holidays, calling me on weekends. But gradually the calls became less frequent, the invitations more formal, and our meetings turned into polite but cold sit downs. I realized I had a lot to blame myself for. After Frank's death, I'd been too overwhelmed by grief, too much in need of intimacy with the only family I had left. I guess I really was intrusive, calling too often, giving unsolicited advice. Michelle was annoyed by it, and Jason chose peace in the family over a relationship with his mother. Around 4 o'clock, I heard a car pull up outside. I looked out the window and saw a familiar black SUV. Jason had gotten home from work earlier than usual. I wondered why. He usually didn't get there until 6 o'clock. There were voices downstairs. Jason was talking to Michelle about something, and his tone was agitated. I strained my hearing, trying to make out the words. Something about work, a meeting, some kind of trouble. Michelle was asking questions, her voice troubled. Then their conversation moved into the living room, and I couldn't make out the words. But I could sense that something serious and unpleasant was being discussed. Every now and then, one of them raised his voice, and then there was silence again. At 6:30, Jason went upstairs. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, then a knock on the study door. "Mom, can I come in?" "Sure." He came in, and I noticed right away that he looked worse than he had this morning. His face was gaunt, his eyes were red, his tie was loose, his gait was heavy, his shoulders slumped. "How's work going?" I asked. "Not so good." He sat down in the leather chair by the desk. "We had an emergency meeting today. The company is cutting costs, laying off 20% of its employees. Has it affected you?" "Not yet, but the atmosphere is nervous. Everyone's afraid for their jobs." I remained silent, waiting for the rest of the story. "Mom, have you thought about our conversation this morning?" "I've been thinking about it all day." "And what conclusion did you come to?" I looked at him carefully. Jason was avoiding a direct gaze, fiddling with the pen he'd taken from the table. He was more nervous than usual. "Jason, does Michelle know about your financial problems?" He froze, the pen frozen in his hands. "What kind of problems?" "The ones Rick Palmer told me about. Credit cards, car loans." "Mom, they're not really problems. It's just a temporary hiccup." "So Michelle doesn't know?" There was a long pause. Jason put his pen down on the table and rubbed his temple. "Doesn't know in full. Why upset her? She's already stressed out at work." "Does she know you asked me for money 3 years ago?" "No." Her voice got quieter. "I told her I did it on my own." The picture was starting to become clearer. Jason had been living in debt, hiding it from his wife, and now he was trying to make it up to me. $7,500 could have made his financial situation a lot easier. "Jason, do you realize you're asking me to give away almost all of my savings?" "Mom, it's not forever. As soon as my situation improves, I'll pay you back." "When? A year from now? 5 years? Or never?" "I'll pay you back. You know I always keep my word." He keeps his word. I wonder if he remembers his promise to take care of his mother in her old age. What if you don't? If you lose your job or have more problems? "I won't. I'm a good specialist. I'm valued by the company." "You said yourself today that they were laying off 20% of their employees." Jason stood up and walked around the office. He was obviously cornered and trying to find a way out. "Mom, I know it's a lot of money for you, but I don't have a choice. If I don't solve the financial problem soon, Michelle will find out. She could file for divorce, take half the assets, take Sierra. And to avoid that, you're willing to rip off your own mother?" "No, I'm not." He raised his voice. "I'm asking for temporary help, like family to family." "Family to family," I repeated. "And when I asked for temporary help, you billed me. That's not the same thing. You're asking for room and board, and I'm just asking for money." "Just money?" Jason, it's all I have. It's my safety cushion, my rainy day fund. And I already have a rainy day. He sat back in his chair. Mom, I'm in a desperate situation. If I don't solve this now, everything's gonna fall apart. My job, my family, my house. I looked at my son and saw not a successful adult man, but a frightened child who had made a mess and didn't know how to get out of it. But this child was willing to sacrifice his mother to save himself. How much exactly do you owe? Credit cards, about 15 grand. Car loan, another 12,000, plus interest and late fees, $27,000 in debt. He asked me for 7.5. I guess he was hoping to cover at least some of the debt and buy some time. And you thought you could solve the $27,000 problem with my $7,500? I thought I'd make the minimum payments to avoid bankruptcy, and then we'll see. And then we'll see what? More loans? More debt? Mom, don't lecture me. I have enough problems. He's got enough problems. He doesn't care that he's causing me problems. Jason, what happens if I refuse to pay this money? He paused for a moment, searching for words. Then you'll have to find another place to live. I told you, we can't keep an extra person. Keeping an extra person, I repeated. That's a good way to describe taking care of a mother. Mom, don't be dramatic. Just be realistic about the situation. Realistically assess the situation. My son, whom I've raised, fed, clothed, and worried about all his life, is ready to put me out on the street if I don't pay him a ransom for the right to be called his mother. Okay, I said. I had a realistic assessment of the situation. E, I'm making a decision to get out of here. Jason jumped up out of his chair. What? Mom, are you crazy? Where are you gonna go? That's my problem. You said it right. You have enough problems of your own. But we had a deal. You pay the money and we'll give you a place to live. We didn't agree on anything. You gave me an ultimatum and I rejected it. Jason's face contorted with panic. He realized he was losing his last chance to get the money. Mom, be reasonable. Where are you going to live? You have no other relatives, no close friends. I'll find a hotel or a nursing home, like you suggested. But it'll cost you a lot more. Maybe, but I'd be paying for services there, not for the right to be loved by my son. Jason grabbed my hand. Mom, don't do anything stupid. Let's just talk about this calmly. Maybe we can find a compromise. Compromise. So there's still room for bargaining. Maybe not 7,500, but 5 or 4. How much is he willing to give up for my motherly love? Jason, let go of my hand. He loosened his fingers, and I got up from the couch. I'll pack up and leave tomorrow morning. Mom, you can't do that. What about me? What about my family? What about his family? What about me? Doesn't he understand that his behavior is breaking my heart? Your family can live without my money. I'll try to get by without my son, who sees me as a source of income. I headed for the door, but Jason blocked me. Mom, stop. You don't understand the gravity of the situation. If I don't solve the financial problems, Michelle will find out. She'll file for divorce. I'll lose my house. I'll lose my daughter. And if I give you all my money, I lose my son. Because after that, you'll be dead to me. Jason turned pale. You can't say that. Yes, I can, because a son who bargains with his mother for money is no longer a son. He's a stranger. I walked around him and left the office. I had to pack my things and think about where to go tomorrow morning. There was no more room in my son's house for his mother. I went back into the study and closed the door behind me. My hands were shaking with nervous tension. My heart was pounding so hard my temples were pounding. I needed to calm down, gather my thoughts, and make practical decisions. Where to sleep tomorrow, how to get there, how much it would cost. First, I pulled out the Indianapolis phone book I'd seen on the shelf next to Jason's business directories. The yellowed pages rustled under my fingers as I searched for the hotels and inns section. Prices ranged from $50 a night in the cheapest places to $300 in luxury hotels. The average was about $100 a night. For 2 months, that would be $6,000, almost as much as Jason demanded. But at least there I'd be a guest, not a beggar. I picked out a few options in different price ranges and started calling. The first hotel was $50 a night, but located in a rough neighborhood. The receptionist, with a noticeable accent, explained that they had rooms available, but recommended not going out at night. The second option was $70, but the rooms were only rented for a day, with no possibility of a long-term stay. The third hotel was acceptable, $85 per night, clean rooms, breakfast included. There are discounts for regular customers when staying more than a week. We have a vacant room on the first floor, the receptionist said. It is suitable for an elderly person. No need to climb the stairs. You can check in tomorrow from 12 noon. Please book it for a week. Maybe I'll extend it. Of course. Will you be paying by card or cash? Cash. I wrote down the address of the hotel and got a certificate that said I could get there by bus or cab. It was about 20 kilometers from Jason's house, so a cab ride would cost $30 or $40. Now I had to pack. I opened my suitcase and began to stow my clothes. Every item reminded me of my old life: the sweater Frank had given me for my birthday, the blouse I'd bought for Jason's high school graduation, the comfortable shoes I'd worn for thousands of miles in the hospital corridors. It all fit into one suitcase now. Footsteps sounded outside the door, then quiet voices. Jason was talking to Michelle about something, explaining the situation. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was exculpatory, pleading. Apparently, his wife had to tell him about the financial problems. Michelle answered sharply, at times raising her voice. The words money, mother, problems were heard. Then their conversation moved into the bedroom, and the sounds became muffled. I put my medications, my makeup bag, my phone charger in my suitcase. I wrapped Frank's picture in a soft sweater so the glass wouldn't break. I decided to keep the books. Space in the suitcase was limited, and the hotel probably had a TV for leisure. At 7:30, Sierra returned. I heard the front door slam, then a girl's voice from the hallway. "Mom, I'm home. Where is everyone? It's very quiet." Michelle answered, coming down from the second floor. She was quickly explaining something to her daughter, her voice sounding tense. Sierra asked questions, her tone becoming more and more anxious. "Is Grandma leaving? Why? What happened?" "Ask your father. He's the one who set the whole thing up with his stupid demands." "What demands?" "Mom, explain it properly." Michelle clearly didn't want to go into details. She said something about family disagreements and that adults should solve their own problems. But Sierra didn't stop, kept insisting on explanations. Finally, the girl went upstairs. Her footsteps stopped at the study door, and after a minute there was a soft knock. "Grandmother, may I come in?" "Of course, dear." Sierra entered, still in her school uniform, with her backpack on her shoulders, face anxious, eyes wide open. "Is it true you're leaving?" "It's true." "But why? You just got here yesterday. Your apartment is still being renovated." I put aside the things I was putting in my suitcase and sat down on the couch next to my granddaughter. "Sierra, sometimes adults can't get along, even if they're family. But your family." Daddy always said family is the most important thing. Family is the most important thing. I wonder when Jason forgot his own words. Your dad's right. Family is important, but only when people really care about each other. "Doesn't your dad care about you?" "He agreed to let you live with us." Naive girl. She didn't know the price her father put on that care. "Sierra, didn't your parents tell you what the problem was?" "Mom said you and Dad were having a disagreement about finances." and Dad locked himself in his bedroom and won't talk. Financial disagreements. That's a pretty delicate way to describe Dad demanding $7,500 from Grandma for 2 months' rent. You see, honey, sometimes people expect more from their relatives than they can give, and then it's better to part amicably than to quarrel. But where will you go? You haven't got another home. I'll find a place. Don't worry about me. Sierra was quiet for a moment, thinking about what she had heard. Grandma, is this about money? Did Daddy ask you to pay your rent? Smart girl. Too smart for her 17 years. How do you know? I overheard Mom and Dad talking yesterday. Something about spending and fair prices. At first, I didn't understand what they were talking about, but now I do. So, Michelle was discussing my staying here as a business deal, and she wasn't embarrassed about what her daughter might hear. How much did they want to charge you? Quite a lot. More than I can afford. That's terrible. Sierra jumped up from the couch. How can you charge your own grandmother to live in a house? Shh, honey. Your parents might hear. Let them hear. The girl's voice trembled with indignation. It's not fair. You're family. At that moment, the office door opened and Jason walked in. His face was grim, his shoulders slumped. He looked at his daughter, then at me. Sierra, go to your room. Do your homework. Daddy, is it true you asked Grandma to pay the money? That's none of your business. Go study. It is my business. The girl flared up. She's my grandmother. The only grandmother I have. Sierra, don't meddle in adult conversations. And you don't kick your grandmother out of the house. Jason pressed his lips together. He clearly hadn't expected this reaction from his daughter. No one's kicking her out. It's just that we couldn't agree on living arrangements. Living arrangements? Sierra looked at her father as if he were a stranger. Daddy, do you hear what you're saying? This is your mother, and you're haggling with her like she's a tenant. Sierra, you don't understand the situation. We have expenses. We have obligations. We have a new $70,000 car. Mom has a $5,000 fur coat. I have a $3,000 laptop. No money for Grandma? Jason was confused. His daughter listed the purchases the family had made in recent years, and it became obvious that the problem wasn't a lack of money, but an unwillingness to spend it on me. This is different. These are necessities. Necessary? Sierra laughed bitterly. Dad, do you need a $70,000 car? Mom needs a $5,000 fur coat? Sierra, don't be rude to your parents. I'm not being rude. I'm telling the truth. You can spend money on stuff, and when Grandma needs help, you count every dollar. I got up from the couch and put my hand on my granddaughter's shoulder. Sierra, don't fight with your father over me. It's not your fault. But it's not fair, Grandma. You've taken care of Dad all your life, and now he's treating you like a stranger. Jason turned pale. Sierra, that's enough. Go to your room, now. I'm not going. I will not be silent when you hurt my grandmother. Sierra. Jason's voice became threatening. The girl looked at her father with contempt, then turned to me. Grandma, if you really go away, can I call you? Come to visit? Of course, dear. I'll always be happy to see you. Promise? I promise. Sierra gave me a big, childlike hug. She smelled like school books and apple shampoo. I love you, Grandma, and I'm ashamed of Daddy. I love you too. Don't be ashamed. You're a good girl. Sierra ran out of the study, slamming the door loudly. Jason was left standing in the middle of the room, confused and depressed. Mom, you turned your daughter against me. I didn't tell her anything. Sierra figured it out on her own. She's just a kid. She doesn't understand the complexity of the situation. But she understands what justice is. Apparently, it wasn't beaten out of her in the school of life. Jason sat back in his chair and put his head in his hands. Mom, what am I going to do? Michelle is furious. Sierra won't talk to me, and I still have a pile of debt. Your problems, your decisions. But you know I'm desperate. I do, but that doesn't give you the right to blackmail your own mother. He raised his head and looked at me with tired eyes. So you're definitely leaving? Yes, tomorrow morning. And no amount of persuasion will stop you? No. Jason sighed heavily and got up from his chair. Well then. Then good luck, Mom. Good luck. Not an apology for kicking me out the door, not regret for a broken relationship. Just a formal wish of good luck, like a casual acquaintance. Thank you, I replied. Good luck with your problems, too. He walked out, and I stayed behind to finish packing. My suitcase was almost ready, my hotel phone number was written down, and I could call a cab in the morning. Tomorrow at this time, I will be somewhere else, starting a new life without a son who preferred money to a mother's love. It was beginning to get dark outside the window. Somewhere out there, in a huge city, uncertainty was waiting for me. But even uncertainty was better than humiliation in my own son's house. The room at the Midtown Inn was small but clean and cozy. One room with a double bed, a desk, a chair by the window, and a small bathroom. The walls are painted in calm beige tones. The floor is carpeted with discreet colors. The windows have thick curtains. Nothing superfluous, but everything you need is there. TV, air conditioner, mini fridge, coffee maker. I set my suitcase on the luggage rack and looked around. For the first time in many years, I was in a completely unfamiliar place where no one knew my history, made no demands, expected nothing from me but timely payment of the bill. It was a strange feeling, both frightening and liberating at the same time. The morning I was about to leave Jason's house, no one came out to see me off. Michelle had already left for work, Sierra for school. Only Jason came down the hallway as I set my suitcase by the door and put on my coat. Mom, why don't you stay after all? He asked, but his voice sounded more formal than sincere. No, Jason, the decision's been made. Then he handed me an envelope. Here's $500 for the first time. I didn't take the envelope. Keep it to pay off your debts. Mom, don't be proud. The money may come in handy. If I take this money, I'll feel indebted. And I don't owe anyone anything anymore. Jason lowered the envelope. There was a twinkle of relief in his eyes. It must have been hard for him to part with the money, even under these circumstances. The cab arrived exactly as scheduled. The driver, an elderly African-American man with a gray beard, said hello politely and helped me carry my suitcase to the car. On the way to the hotel, we hardly spoke at all. He occasionally commented on traffic congestion. I stared out the window at the city floating by. Indianapolis in the morning looked businesslike and indifferent. People were rushing to work, cars were stuck in traffic jams, and the lights were on in the storefronts. The ordinary life of an ordinary American city in which there was no place for me yet. Check-in at the hotel was quick and without problems. The girl administrator turned out to be the same one I had talked to on the phone. Young, with a friendly smile, she explained the rules of accommodation, gave me the key, and wished me a pleasant vacation. Breakfast is served from 7 to 10 in the restaurant on the first floor, she said. If you need anything, contact the receptionist around the clock. Now settled in my room, I felt something resembling calm for the first time in days. No one would demand money from me for the right to be here. No one would make lists of rules and restrictions. No one would look at me as a burden. I pulled a picture of Frank out of my suitcase and set it on my bedside table. A familiar face smiled at me from the silver frame, and it felt a little less lonely. Well, Frank, I said aloud, I've finally brought my son to the edge. Or did he drive himself? There was no answer, of course, but I felt the need to talk to my husband, as I had done sometimes in the first years after his death. Then it felt like he was somewhere near, just unable to answer. Over time, that feeling went away, but today it returned with renewed vigor. I sat in the chair by the window and tried to make sense of what was happening. How did it happen that my son, whom I loved more than life, turned into a cold, calculating man, ready to bargain with his own mother? Where did I go wrong in his upbringing? Jason grew up as an ordinary child, no worse or better than his peers. He had average grades, no special talents, but he didn't cause any serious problems. After school, he went to college, got a degree in economics, got a job in an insurance company. His career was going well. Gradual growth in the service, salary increase, recognition of colleagues. Maybe the problem was that Frank and I spoiled him too much, giving him everything he asked for, not teaching him responsibility? Or, on the contrary, were we too strict, and he grew up feeling that love had to be earned? I thought back to specific episodes from Jason's childhood and adolescence, trying to find the root of the problem. He had always been a practical boy, prone to calculating the benefits. At 10, he traded his toys for the more expensive toys of his classmates. At 13, he worked part-time as a newspaper boy and spent his earnings very carefully. At 16, he refused to come with us to my parents' cottage, preferring a part-time job at summer camp. At the time, Frank and I thought it was a sign of maturity and responsibility. We were glad that our son was growing up independent, knows how to value money, and does not waste it. We didn't realize that practicality was gradually turning into mercantilism, and the ability to count money into the habit of measuring everything by material gain. When Jason married Michelle, I was happy at first. The girl seemed smart, beautiful, ambitious. She worked as a manager in an advertising agency, earned good money, had clear plans for the future. Just what my practical son needed. But gradually, I began to notice that Michelle was treating life as a business project. She planned her husband's career, calculated the family budget for years ahead, chose friends according to their social status, and Jason willingly obeyed this system, finding comfort and clarity in it. A house in an upscale neighborhood, an expensive car, brand name clothes, a private school for Sierra. All this required a lot of spending. The family's income was enough for current needs, but there was no reserve for emergencies. And when the financial problems began, Jason had taken the easiest way to solve them at his mother's expense. I got up from my chair and walked to the window. Downstairs, in the hotel parking lot, were the cars of the guests. Ordinary cars of ordinary people, not luxury SUVs, but practical sedans and station wagons. People who live within their means, do not go into debt for the sake of status, do not require relatives to pay for family love. On the bedside table was my bank book, $8,400. With reasonable savings, that's enough money for a few months of living in a hotel. And then what? Look for cheap housing, cut expenses to a minimum, hope that health will not fail. But there was another problem, the will. 5 years ago, after Frank's death, I'd made a will that transferred all my assets to Jason. The apartment, my savings, my personal belongings, everything was to go to my only son. It had seemed natural and right at the time. I thought about it differently now. Should I leave an inheritance to someone who treats his mother as a source of income? Wouldn't it be better to give the money to those who really need it? I remembered about a fund for the elderly that I read about in the newspaper. They help lonely old people pay for treatment, organize social programs, or an orphanage where orphans are raised. These kids certainly won't bargain with benefactors, won't foot the bill for gratitude. The thought of disinheriting Jason was painful, but even more painful was the thought of him getting that money and spending it to pay off debts accumulated for the sake of ostentatious prosperity. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a piece of hotel paper. I needed to write down my thoughts before they drifted away. Make a plan of action for the immediate future. 1. I wrote, find a lawyer and rewrite the will. 2. Resolve the issue of permanent housing. 3. Calculate realistic expenses and make a budget. The will had to make several provisions. Leave the bulk of the money to charitable organizations. Sierra should be given an amount for her education. She was not to blame for her father's behavior and deserved support. Jason was to be left a token amount of money, just as much as he'd asked me to pay to stay in his house. $7,500. Let it be a reminder of how much he appreciated a mother's love. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Jason's number came up on the display. I stared at the screen for a long moment, wondering if I should answer it. Finally, I picked up the phone. Yeah, Mom, it's me. How are you? How's the hotel? It's fine. Thanks for your concern. Listen, I've been thinking. Maybe we can find a compromise. Renegotiate the terms? Compromise. So he's willing to lower the price. I wonder how much. Jason, I've already made my decision. I'm comfortable here. But it's only temporary. You can't stay in a hotel forever. Why not? I'm not a burden here. Mom, don't say that. We didn't think you were a burden. Of course we didn't. Just a supplemental income. I didn't mean for it to turn out this way. It's just that I'm in a difficult situation, and I didn't know what to do. You did. I could have asked my mother for help like a son, not billed as a landlord to a guest. Jason was quiet. Mom, I know I was wrong, but it's too late to change anything now. Yes, it is. So you don't want to hang out with me anymore? I looked at Frank's picture. What would he advise in that situation? Forgive or hold a grudge? Jason, I will always be your mother, but trust takes years to rebuild, and you broke it in one day. I'm ready to make it right. Tell me what you need to do. You don't have to do anything. Live your life, solve your problems. I'll solve mine. Mom. Goodbye, Jason. I hung up the phone and turned it off. I didn't want to talk to anyone else today. I wanted silence, peace, and time to think about my life. It was starting to get dark outside the window. Somewhere in the city, the lights were on. Families were gathering for dinner. Children were doing their homework. Parents were planning their weekends. Ordinary life that I found myself cut off from. But maybe it was for the best. Maybe it was time to start a new life where there would be no room for disappointment in the people closest to me. The week at the hotel flew by faster than I expected. The days took on a rhythm of their own. Breakfast at the restaurant at 8 in the morning, a walk in the nearby park, reading in the room, lunch in a small cafe across the street, afternoon rest, dinner and TV before bed, a simple, measured life without stress or conflict. I accomplished a lot in those 7 days. I found a law office near the hotel and made an appointment with a lawyer to review a will. I studied the advertisements for long-term apartment rentals in the city and chose a few suitable options to look at, calculated an accurate budget for the coming months, including possible medical expenses. The hotel staff had already gotten used to me. The girls at the reception greeted me by name. The maid Maria, who cleaned my room, was always interested in my well-being. In the restaurant, waitress Sarah remembered my food preferences and brought coffee every morning without reminding me. Here I was accepted for who I was, without asking for anything in return, except for paying the bill. The phone rang several times during the week. Jason tried to call, but I didn't answer. Sierra sent 2 texts, asking how I was doing, saying hi. Michelle didn't call at all. Apparently, she thought the incident was over. On Tuesday, I went to look at an apartment in an apartment building for seniors. It was a small studio apartment with furniture, kitchen appliances, and 24-hour security. The rent was $700 a month plus utilities. Expensive, but acceptable for my budget for the coming year. On Wednesday, I met with attorney David Cohen, an older man with attentive eyes and an accommodating manner. He listened to my story without comment, only occasionally elaborating on details. Mrs. Coleman, he said at the end of the meeting, I understand your feelings. Unfortunately, such family conflicts over money are becoming more and more common. People forget that some things are more important than material gain. Is it possible to change the will so that my son gets exactly what he asked me for living expenses? Of course, it's your right as the testator. The only condition is that you must be of sound mind at the time you sign the document, which, based on our conversation, is exactly what I'm sure you are. We discussed the details of the new will. The bulk of my savings and the value of the apartment after it's sold will go to a senior citizens fund. I'll leave Sierra $15,000 for her education, an amount that will help her in college, but not corrupt her with easy money. Jason will receive exactly $7,500 and an explanatory note stating that this is payment for the parental attention he gave me in my time of need. The document will be ready by Friday, the lawyer said. Come to sign it. Bring 2 witnesses. We can organize them here at the office. On Thursday, I talked to the management company servicing my house and found out about the progress of repair work. It turned out that the damage was more serious than the initial assessment. Not only the floors and ceilings were affected, but also the electrical wiring. The work will continue for at least another 6 weeks, and maybe more. The neighbor's insurance company has agreed to cover all expenses, the manager said, but the paperwork is being delayed. Have you settled somewhere in the meantime? Yes, I've temporarily solved the housing problem. That's great. As soon as the repairs are finished, we'll notify you. You won't be able to come home for another month and a half. Unless, of course, you want to go back. After a week of living in a hotel, I realized the change of scenery was good for me. The old apartment was full of memories of Frank, of my old life, of a time when my relationship with my son was still intact. On Friday morning, I signed the new will in the presence of 2 witnesses, the secretary of the law firm and the notary. The document looked official and final. Attorney Cohen assured me that everything was properly executed and no one could contest my will. Keep the original in a safe place, he advised, and you can keep a copy in our safe. As I drove back to the hotel after signing the will, I felt strangely relieved. Now Jason would get exactly what he thought it was fair to charge his mother for temporary lodging. No more, no less. Saturday passed quietly. I took a long walk around town, going into stores and looking at the windows. In the bookstore, I bought a detective and a collection of O. Henry's stories. At the drugstore, I replenished my stock of medicines. In the grocery store, took fruit and cookies for tea in the room. In the evening, about 7 o'clock, there was a knock on the room door. I thought it was the maid forgetting something, but I saw Jason through the peephole. He was standing in the hallway with a bouquet of flowers in his hand, looking confused and unsure. I pondered whether to open the door. Finally, I decided to listen to what he had to say. Hi, Mom. Jason handed me the flowers. Can I come in? Come in. He walked into the room looking around. I guess he was expecting something a little more shabby. It's nice here, he said. It's cozy. I like it. Jason sat down in the chair, putting the bouquet on the table. He looked tired and depressed. His suit was crumpled, his tie loose, dark circles under his eyes. Mom, I came to apologize for everything that happened last week. Apology accepted. I behaved horribly. I don't know what came over me. Financial problems, stress at work, Michelle's pressure. None of that excuses my behavior. No excuse, I agreed. Mom, I want you to come home, to us. No money, no strings attached. Just as a mother to her son. I looked at him carefully. His face was sincere, his voice full of remorse. but something told me it wasn't just remorse. What does Michelle say about this offer? Jason hesitated. She, uh, she agrees, realizes what we did was wrong. She does? Then why didn't she come over to apologize? She has work today. But she said she was sorry for what happened. That's a lie. It was obvious from Jason's face that Michelle had no regrets. Jason, what's the status of your debts? I haven't decided yet. I'm looking at my options. And I'm one of the options? He's blushing. No, Mom, I'm not asking you for any more money. I'm going to make it on my own. I'll get by on my own. And if you can't get by on your own, it'll work out. Maybe I'll take an extra job, sell the car. He'll sell the car. I wonder how serious the situation is if he's willing to part with his favorite SUV. Mom, please come back. Sierra's really worried. She asks about you every day. Sierra, that was a strong argument. I really missed my granddaughter, her spontaneity and sincerity. Are you worried about her, or do you just want to comfort your daughter? Jason paused, searching for words. I'm worried. I realize I've lost something important. I realized I'd ruined a relationship with the person I cared most about. Your closest person? Yeah, you're my mother, my only mother. Jason, what's changed this week? Why do you suddenly realize I'm the closest thing to you? He got up from his chair and walked to the window. Everything had changed. The house was empty. Michelle's mad at me. Sierra hardly talks to me. And I realized what I'd done. What exactly did you do? Betrayed my family. Betrayed you. Acted like a merchant. A merchant. That's a pretty good definition. Mom, give me a second chance. Let me make it right. I stood up and picked up a piece of paper from the table, the same one I'd written my plans on a week ago. Jason, I want to tell you about my new plans. What plans? First of all, I'm not going to live in your house anymore, even if you begged me to. I'm renting an apartment and moving in next week. But why? It's expensive. Second, I rewrote my will. Jason's face turned gray. What? What do you mean? You will inherit exactly $7,500, the very amount you thought was a fair price to pay for kinship. Mom, you can't do that. Yes, I can, and I have. The deed is signed and witnessed. Jason fell back in his chair. And the rest of the money? It's going to the Senior Citizens Fund and Sierra's education. Mom, this is crazy. You can't give all that money to strangers. Why not? It's my money, my decision. But I'm your son. I have rights. Rights? I laughed. What rights did I have to your help when I needed it? Jason was silent, realizing there was nothing to say. Third, I continued, our relationship has changed forever. I'm no longer the mother who forgives and understands everything. I'm just an older woman who will communicate with you politely but distantly. Mom, don't say that. We're family. Family? You yourself explained to me a week ago that in the 21st century, even in the family, everything is calculated according to justice. So I settled. But I apologize. I admit my mistakes. Too late, Jason. Some things can't be fixed by apologizing. He got up and started pacing the room. Mom, you know I was desperate. People do stupid things when they're cornered. They do, but then they pay for it for the rest of their lives. So you'll never forgive me? I looked at Frank's picture on my bedside table. I will, but I'll never trust. And without trust, what kind of relationship can you have? Jason stopped at the door. Mom, what should I tell Sierra? She wants to know when you're coming back. Tell her the truth, that Dad asked Grandma to pay for love, and she refused. She'll hate me. She might. But she has a right to know what kind of father she has. Jason opened the door, then turned around. Mom, what if I hadn't asked you for money a week ago? if I just accepted you as my own mother. Then everything would have been different. And the will, and the will. So I've punished myself. Yes, Jason, I punished myself for the rest of my life. He walked out, quietly closing the door behind him, and I was alone in my hotel room with the bouquet of flowers he'd brought and the realization that my life had finally changed. There was no longer a son to rely on. There was only myself, my independence, and the bitter wisdom that family ties are not always stronger than monetary interests.